Hello, this is TaAF Talks. I'm Jamie, and with me is my brother from another mother, Ken Massey. What we're going to do today is, it feels like, Ken, that we are reaching a natural conclusion to our first season of the TaAF Talks podcast. Mainly because we've run out of ideas. That's not true. We're full of great ideas, I'm sure. But what we wanted to do is just maybe do our own little review of season one. See how we felt it's gone. Identify perhaps some of the things that we got right, some of the things that we didn't, and times that we smashed it and times that we were woeful. And maybe look a little bit to the future as well. So you up for this, buddy? We're going to reflect and kind of be honest about it all.
Yeah, I think it's really good to take stock, isn't it? You know, we've done, I think, 17 or 18 episodes so far, had some really great guests, some really great chats. And, you know, for me, the whole purpose of doing the podcast was to learn and to grow. And so it'd be good to reflect on that and whether we've accomplished some of those goals that we set out with. And then to think about and talk about, well, what's next, you know, in this attempt for world domination? How do we move on to the next thing?
Yeah, we've started slowly on the step towards world domination, it's fair to say.
No, but I think we've got 6 to 8 regular listeners.
Whoa!
That was 6 to 8, not 6 to 8.
And I think so. I'm going to recap on something we said in the first podcast, but I think one thing to just say there is, if you remember in podcast 1, we talked about pod fade, where a lot of podcasts get to episode 7 or 8. Yeah. And then they kind of no longer happen. So well done to us.
Yeah.
17 or 18 in the bag is pretty good. So yeah, well done us. But I think we highlighted a few things in podcast 1 that we wanted to get out of it. So I'm going to just rhyme a few of those off now, and let's just kind of give a quick assessment of them. So we said we wanted to enjoy it and have some fun. We wanted to test whether this format works for being able to share information and learning in an interesting way. We wanted to bring in some of the guests who we were lucky enough to spend some time with and start kind of getting their wisdom out there a bit more widely. And we wanted a format that gave me and you a chance to capture some of our own chats and reflections that me and you like to do together. So just pick a couple of them maybe and think out loud about that.
Well, I think certainly some of the guests that we've got in have been incredible, and definitely learned some really interesting things from different guests, and we'll maybe come back onto that in a minute. I've certainly enjoyed it, and that's one of the reasons why I think we've been able to continue now for probably 6 months-ish, doing a podcast every couple of weeks, and you know, something I'm really keen to continue with. So I think for me, the other thing that we've done in different ways, maybe not always got entirely right, is capturing that learning and the things that we're learning together at Active Future and some of our discussions. I think we've got some really good examples of that. And then some others where we've had guests who have been brilliant, but from time to time it's been a little bit disjointed sometimes, that a guest might not quite fit into the overall theme. And the challenge with that is it's been a little bit difficult to find guests from time to time, and people who we've thought they're doing something really interesting, the system changer, we've had a chat about it and brought them in. But it's perhaps been 17 different, almost slightly disjointed episodes about different things, which is perhaps something for us to work on moving forwards. But I'd say overall, great guests, really good learning, and we've really enjoyed it. I think COVID's had a little bit of an impact, and so Zoom, we've had fun, and it's been really efficient in terms of recording podcasts on Zoom. But I don't think, for me, it's not been quite as enjoyable as the kind of face-to-face meeting people, interacting. I don't know what your view on that is. I feel like you're quite a face-to-facey sort of person as well, probably.
Yeah, I am. And I think, like I said, it's been fun, but I found it harder the longer we've been doing the Zoom ones. The novelty, if you like, has started to wear off, and I am missing the personal interaction. You know, I live off being in the room with people and bouncing back and forth with people, and I like to review, and it's much easier to review if I'm sat with you and I can kind of, you know, be in the same space, and I get my energy from that. So I think I have missed that being in the same space together. you know, and the post-podcast hugs that we used to do. I miss them a lot. That's not real, by the way.
That's a bit too much information. I think the same for me, in the sense that you've got a lot more, I would say, natural enthusiasm and energy than me, and I really fed off that when we're together. That's been more difficult when I'm sat in my loft by myself. Sometimes recording a podcast while I can hear my children playing in the garden while I'm sat in this dark, dingy loft, and it's been more difficult, I think, and to bring that sense of energy and enthusiasm to the podcast when we've not been together. For me, definitely.
Yeah. And so the other thing I'd say is, yes, I have had fun, but I'm ready to start reconnecting back in a real way. I have enjoyed the guests, but I think the most important thing, I do think this format is actually quite an effective way of sharing. Admittedly, we don't have thousands and thousands of listeners just yet. But I think what we do have now is a body of work, if you like. If everyone wants to know what's the experience like for TaAF with regards to the fact we have the secondment model, like, well, we've got a 25-minute podcast that tells you our very true and real reflections of it. And if you listen to that, that would be a really great summary of how we feel about stuff. So I think that's worked nicely. I think let's move on to the next bit now, which I think coming back to what the key thing I think you made there, one of the key points you made was it hasn't potentially had a natural flow or connection from podcast to podcast. We haven't necessarily, had a consistent theme that we've stuck to. So let's do that. Learning from season 1, what didn't we get right? And I think just to summarise that point, we probably had too broad a theme of what we could record podcasts about. Like I say, it was either me and you talking about something very real for TaAF, or we bring in a guest and talk about a more bigger application of things. Or in some cases, we bring in a guest who was doing something great, but actually almost had no application for us as a TaAF team. And whilst I would say they're all kind of interesting, if you're a steady listener, you're probably struggling to feel like what's the thing that ties all of this together. So
I was going to say, I think that's absolutely true. And when you say a fairly broad theme, I'd probably say no theme at all. I think what has held it together with a bit of a string of commonality, though, is and I think one thing that's worked really well in that sense is the structure of the podcast in terms of some of the things that we've included. So I think that's worked well, but I agree that moving forwards, it'd be nice to kind of capture in maybe a small group of 6 or 8 podcasts a bit of a collective sense of theme and togetherness, definitely.
Yeah, okay. Well, and we're going to come at the end. We're going to kind of explain our thoughts about the kind of the next season, or if there will even be one. Let's leave people on a knife's edge until the end of this podcast to know if we're going to continue. There's 3 listeners at the moment panicking. So I think one thing we probably have both agreed on, that we haven't had a clear plan of promotion and how we want to get the podcast out there. I think, surprisingly, if people know me and you and know we're a little bit tongue-in-cheek cocky, actually, there's certain things from a TaAF team that we're not. It's hard to be a shameless self-publicist with a podcast that you've recorded, that's yours, because it's almost that thing of saying, by the way, here's the thing I've recorded. I think you should listen to it because I think it's great. There you go. And I think because of that little bit of hesitancy to do that, I think we haven't really proactively or even forcefully put it out there for people to listen to. We've almost done it passively. We've tweeted and allowed people to find it for themselves to a degree. And I imagine that the best podcasts around don't do that. I imagine they've got a very direct way of informing people that there's something about and explaining what it is and why people should listen. So I think we definitely need to do that better going forwards. And I think what you said, that clearer theme of, a more specific reason for people to listen they can connect to, will probably help that quite a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's absolutely, I think, probably been not one of the downfalls, because it's not necessarily been about having lots of listeners. It's about capturing the learning and that enjoyment and all those other things. But yeah, we've not shared it, I think, in the spirit of sharing the learning of Together and Active Future on that broader footing as much as we could have. And it is really difficult to do that. I've tried to be active-ish on Twitter and social media, but you're right. It's hard to say, here's a thing, that I've done that's really good and you should get involved with it. It's really easy to say, this is a thing that someone else has done that's really good and you should listen to it. You know, Harry Potter, this is a good book, you should read it. Is it easier than, here's a book that I've written and you should read it? It's just
and what you're saying there is you're equating us to the Harry Potter cultural phenomenon, which I agree with. We are that big.
Very close. I'd say just one notch down.
And I think, come back to the point, and the next point is an interesting one because I think we're immediately not doing this thing we've talked about now. But I think, coming back to what you just said there, I think it is, I've just said I think 3 times. Listeners, we're going to come back to this point in about 2 minutes' time. You said what we're doing is capturing the learning, and then you immediately said, and what we're not doing is sharing the learning. And I think that's a really great summary of what we've done. We've captured some stuff, and we've not got it out there. So at the moment, we're not doing the full kind of picture of that. Okay, so I think we have one more point on to bring up is recognising that you and I don't always need to add a comment or add our own thought. I think a few of our podcasts have drifted longer than they needed to. And we've got to appreciate that if people want to give up 30 or 40 minutes of their time, that's amazing. We're probably pushing our luck if we start extending that to 50 and 60 minutes and 65. And we've listened back to some of our podcasts recently. And I think both of us agreed that sometimes a point would almost be finished, but because we both feel like we always have something to contribute, we'd bring it back again just so we could add that extra point. And recognising that we can stop doing that in the future will make things more effective, make it easier to listen to and value listeners' time perhaps more than we have done so far.
I think we're going to come to that. You know, if you would just not make your point and let me make mine, we'd be good.
That is the learning. From now on, I'll just say, hi, welcome to TaAF Talks, and then I'll shut up for the next 40 minutes. Okay, so there's some learning there. And do you know what? If anybody's listening to us and you feel like you have some feedback for us that could work, feel free to share it, because we're always genuinely looking for people to help us out learning here. So do kind of let us know if you think there's something else we could work on. Now, let's talk about what we think works well, because there has been a lot of good, I think, in what we've done. So I personally enjoy our dynamic. The podcast when we were in the same space together, I think, are the best example of that. But I enjoy how me and you kind of interact and play off each other, because we're quite different personalities, which I think works well. As you said before, it's what I play a slightly different role to you, but that's natural because I would do that in life anyway. I think both of us bring our own unique styles and strengths, and we've carried that on. We haven't diluted it because we're recording it.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned it earlier. I think the structures worked really well, particularly the kind of 2 halves with the Pennine quickfire questions in the middle. Those little questions have just been, just for me, just a lot of fun, and got to know people a bit better. In every single podcast, someone said something that has been surprising. You know, those. I mean, what's been your favourite moment out of those Pennine quickfire questions?
Well, we probably have some similar ones, so thank you for letting me go first, because I'll probably pick one that you would have picked. So I hope you've got another one lined up. I did like the one with Mark Stevenson in the Partnerships podcast, where you did what we always do, which is set off our timer, which goes constantly clicks in the ear. And as soon as we got to the question where we asked Mark, what annoys you the most, he immediately responded with a ticking clock, which was absolutely, so quick and witty. It made us both laugh out loud for quite a bit on that one. So I'd never heard that answer before, and it was perfect.
Yeah, he had a lot of witty responses all the way through, Mark. I think a couple that I liked, or that just the reaction and the conversation that followed, where Tim Pattenden said he spent 2 hours getting ready when we were discussing, mental resilience and emotional health. But then when he talked to us about it, in this sense of he does affirmation statements and reading books with his children every morning and X, Y, Z, I thought, actually that makes you a pretty incredible person.
It did, but then afterwards I thought, I don't believe you. I think that's just shower, talcum powder, hairstyling. I think it's all of that, really.
Yeah. The other one I liked was our other Tim Hollingsworth. I didn't know, and it was really interesting. It was around him being having a degree in or a master's in performing arts, which led to a really good conversation. So, and my final one was Leon Cruikshank talking about his high pitched singing. Was a good one as well. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah. Group 5 questions, I think, have worked really nicely. Like I say, it naturally breaks the structure a little bit, but also gives you a little bit of a flavour of the personality of the person, which isn't always an easy thing to get across on a podcast. I think I've just done it again. So at the end of this, we're going to do a counter for how many I thinks that me and Ken both say, and that's something I'm going to touch on in a second.
I think that'd be a bit.
We've tried to always relate things back to the way what TaAF are trying to learn about. I think we haven't always done that successfully, but we have always been mindful that we are trying to have an audience for this podcast that are probably the local delivery pilots and the people who are in this area of an arena of work that we're doing. So we have tried to do that. I think we could probably do it better. But each time we've always tried to say, well, help us relate to that, to give us some real practical examples that people could follow. And tech, we've done all right. We haven't really, Alison at the start was helping as a producer, but since we haven't really had a producer for a little while now, we don't chuck money at this, and from a tech point of view, we've done okay. We've got intro music that happens at the start and at the end. We've managed to kind of keep it going through Zoom and get it out there on Buzzsprout and other podcast sources and YouTube. And we don't have a comms team who've been doing that for us. Alison really helped us out at the start doing all of this stuff, but we really managed to carry it on. So I think we've done all right for that. So like I said, we haven't chucked hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds at this. Yeah,
I'd say all the tech and the cost is a couple of £100. And you're right in that. I think that's really good and a positive that you can do a podcast that's of reasonable-ish quality, says we. But yeah, it doesn't cost a lot. We could have spent a lot more on studios and cameras and lighting, and obviously the lighting in
makeup artists would have been nice.
in your particular instance, and my dingy loft really could do with some kind of lighting system in. But
don't worry, season 2, big investment.
Yeah, but it's worked, right? It's worked.
Yeah, I think so.
One thing that I think has been a real boost, though, and an upside is. Because of Zoom, I think recording them visually and having them on YouTube is a learning that's better than just having the audio, and the video option is better than just having the audio.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly, not with today's hairdo, but when we've had guests, it's great to be able to see that dynamic work. And I think for listeners and viewers now to be able to see that as well, I do think works really nice. And we'll try and carry that on even as we move, hopefully, towards being in the same space with people again in the future. So moving in then to let's be a little bit personal about it. Let's get personal, Ken.
All right.
What do we think about our own personal performances in these podcasts? Now, you can either choose to roast yourself or you can roast me. I'm happy either way.
Well, let's do each other then.
Okay. This is going to be harsh.
Well, I think. You've been a really, really good host, I think, and brought the energy right from the start of every podcast. And that's your, I don't know whether that is your natural disposition, actually. I think you probably have a few natural dispositions, but that's the one that you constantly bring and are able to switch on at the start of any meeting, event, podcast, whatever it is. So that's a real talent that you've done well at. I think you've improved as we've gone on at facilitating the discussion and moving us on. So the long ones, I'm not taking any fault or blame for that. That's all you.
Fair enough.
The thing that I've noticed as we've listened back, you are the master of the 7-minute question. Where you start asking a question, you make a point in the middle of your question, followed by a couple of other random points, and then you finish off the question, and me and the guest look at you and say, "What now?"
and actually, the question was, "So how are you doing?"
Yeah. The other things which we've clearly highlighted already in this podcast is you've got 2 little catchphrases, which turns out I have as well, and that you think a little bit. So you say, "I think" a lot at the start of every sentence, which has been really good for us both to realise that we do that. And maybe a lot of people do that, but it's something that definitely needs to stop. and you use the phrase a little bit.
It's a little bit. I think a little bit.
The other thing I'd say, no, I think those are the fair feedback. I'm not going to pile in anymore. That'll do.
No, well, I think most of that, to be honest, was fair, apart from the bad things, which I think was totally unfair. No, I think all of that. I've done it again. Listening back, we both recognised these things, didn't we? And we probably notice it more because you're your own worst self-critic. But it's certainly something we can work on. And I just did it then. I noticeably stopped myself from saying, I think, at the start of both of those sentences. Okay, so on to you. Let's start with the nice stuff, because my list of bad stuff is probably going to take a little while. So you've always, almost in each podcast, you have a great way of reflecting on either a point that's been made or something that's been mentioned by a guest and brought up. And you always then try to explore that from a different angle and look for some kind of insight from that. It's something I can't do naturally. I'm not a reflector. When somebody says something, I have to then come in with thoughts. And because there's two of us, I think it allows me to do that, which is my natural thing, but it allows you to do what you do naturally, which is sit back and think it through a little bit in your mind, and then to make really insightful points or great summaries, or even express that point the guest has made in a way that might be more relatable for our audience. And that is something that you've done regularly throughout the podcast, which I think is fab. And you also do something which I think is something we really want to continue, and that's the taking an awful lot of content and things that have come out in some of these podcasts and the really rich insight, and turning those into really helpful summary points or learning points at the end of each show. We haven't done it in every one, but I think the ones where we have done it, it's almost like a really great way of wrapping something up and distilling out the really key learning points that we might have got from the guest or from what we've discussed. And there's a real art in doing that, because it's really difficult to be in the podcast, but capturing that as we go along. And I think you've done that brilliantly. I think listen to, I think the Tim Pattenden one and the Tim Tollins, the two Tims podcast, both of those are great examples of where you've done that. So two good ones feels enough. So coming on to what we could be working on. So as the opposite to what you said about me with bringing great energy at the start of podcasts, let's be honest and say that hasn't always been the case for yourself. There's certain podcasts where at the start you're like, wow, Ken, you're all right, mate.
The loft.
Yeah, that resting face and the tone of voice.
The loft, mate. I'm in the loft.
So I think working harder to have that energy at the start. I don't know what you might need to do to boost your energy before sort of a podcast.
It's all in the dancing pre-podcast.
Okay, that sounds good. I mean, I'd rather you didn't do it on video. I can't see it. But yeah, I mean, just energy from the start is great because it's our listeners then are energized to listen to it. So that's one thing to maybe think about. You equally have catchphrases. So you do like saying the word interesting, no matter whether the thing was interesting or not. and often, sometimes you'll say it's interesting, and then you'll make a totally different point that you thought was more interesting from your own perspective. Yeah,
that was interesting, but now let me tell you something really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And similar to me with a little bit, you also have, and there's something about, and it's both of us have almost a little starter to our sentences that gives our brain the extra second to think, because we're both too dim to be able to think really quickly. So we both need to work on that. And just be a little bit sharper out the box, or be comfortable that half a second of silence is okay as we gather thoughts.
And there's something about just... I'm just kidding.
And then one last one before we kind of start to look to the future a little bit. Both of us, I feel, at the times when we need to do something that's a bit more rehearsed, the naturalness isn't there. I think both of us rely on our natural personalities and demeanour, and the best. We've listened to quite a few of our podcasts recently to do this review. We both felt that the best podcasts were the ones where we were much more natural, where we were much more just having a conversation. And any time where we had to introduce, so for example, the fact that I do a standard introduction each time, it's okay, but it doesn't come across in the same way as it does when me and you are then chatting about a topic or with a guest about something. So perhaps, and similarly, I think when you do the quick fire questions, but I think anytime me and you have to stop and do a thing that's a rehearsed bit, it just loses some of that naturality, which I'm not sure is a word, but it loses some of that. So perhaps in the future, we keep these kind of things, but we don't do it so dogmatically or robotically to a script that we've prepared. And just see how that goes and accept that we might stumble over words, but that's all right because people do that in life.
Agreed.
So do we feel that was a nice balance? We've been nice to each other, which made me feel a bit nauseous, but happily got to roast each other a little bit on that as well.
I mean, I found it pretty brutal, and I'm not sure I ever want to do a podcast again now.
Well, that takes us nicely on to the next bit of what does the future of the podcast look like?
Okay. Great. I'm glad that we're here. That's my new thing now. Great. Good energy, Ken. I'm loving it. For me, podcast definitely needs to continue, and I think we've decided, or we're going to
let's just let all our listeners applause and cheering ring out through their cars and on the streets first.
Season 2 is a go.
Yes.
And it's going to happen. So we've wrapped up season 1, and this is the wrap up of learning some things. And fortunately, NBC and the BBC and ITV, or whoever else is into these sort of things, ESPN, have commissioned season 2. So we're really excited about that. They haven't agreed to pay us anything for it, but they have said you can if you want.
So your pasty skin and my dodgy haircut could still be here for season 2 without the makeup and hairdress artists.
Good. There will be no further investment in season 2. You'll be pleased to know. Only time and energy. A bit more energy on my part. Thank you. Offensive. So season 2 is happening, and what we've talked about is the idea that what we do is just a bit of a short collection of podcasts where we really just look back over the last 2 years of Together Active Future and our work in place-based system change stuff and some of the things that we've been doing both individually and collectively as part of the project, and just do a bit of just a you and me collection of podcasts, perhaps the occasional guest. Watch this space, you never know. But mostly focused on that interaction, learning, discussion, review of the things we've learned so far. And that might be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 episodes, 2, 3, 4. Depends whether we can come up with anything that we've actually learned so far, which I'm sure.
Well, I think even if we can't come up with, we know we can come up with things we've learned, but I think we can also bring into that the things that we've done that haven't worked in the way we wanted to, and the things that we feel like we've really made a difference on. And I think there are, there we go. There'll be no more I thinks in season 2, but it is that chance to really reflect on some key topics. I think you've raised a couple in the past that are almost like there's some really key stuff here around whether it's about evaluation and some of the interesting challenges we've had on that front, whether it's about our approach to involving, whether it be DWP customers or school teachers in Rosendale. There's been some really rich stuff there, both for good and for bad, which have been really good to share.
Yeah. And so that's the plan, right? That's the plan. We're going to do a collection of podcasts just capturing. So we've done some capturing the learning. I think the bits we've done about physical activity, the ones about secondment model, planning events and how to do really good engagement events. There's been loads of kind of practical learnings and things that people might be able to apply in their work. We're going to try and do a bit more of that for season 2. And then just throwing it out there, some tentative plans for season 3 and a season 4. So
what?
Tentative. Very tentative. That all depends on the BBC investment. Season 4.
Okay.
They're on location in Madrid.
Finally, this podcast is paying off. The minutes of effort I've put into this are finally working out. But I mean, and I think it was your idea to explore the phasing of it. So the next phase being me and you, and see how those goes, and that gives us maybe that theme that we feel like. I think you're quite right. Season 1 felt like 3 themes in one suite of podcasts. Whereas actually splitting that out and saying, well, actually, rather than having 18 of 3 different themes, let's have a group of 6 maybe that are just me and you talking about the things that Together in Active Future have been doing and learning. And then the next one might be 6 or 8, but at a slightly bigger scale and maybe linking into some of the other LDPs or some other kind of really big system change influences. And then phase 3, that's when we're getting, presidential candidates, prime ministerial level kind of guests, the chief execs of the big national governing bodies itching to come and be part of it, to be honest.
Exactly.
So by that point, we'll have at least 30 listeners.
Yeah, and what better platform to get your message out there, right?
If you want to target 30 specific people with your message, TaAF Talks is the place to do it.
Mostly related to Ken Massa and Jamie Moore, family and friends.
And let's be honest, most of that's Ken Massa, because I'm not on social media. I don't promote our Twitter podcast whatsoever.
No, but we're going to have a plan for promotion as well, so get ready for that, everybody.
Wicked. Okay, so we've talked about, and we're going to try and improve and get better.
Yeah.
Now, admittedly, we're already 96% good, so there's only the 4% that we're still working on. But we're definitely going to do that. I think there's something about a little bit that's interesting. Brilliant. Well, I've got to say, just from a personal reflection point of view, Ken, I have enjoyed this with you, mate. And particularly, whilst we said that maybe the Zoom bit doesn't kind of necessarily have that personal interaction that we like, it's meant that I could stay connected to you throughout this, which is a really nice thing for me to be able to do. I still enjoy, don't do that, I'll get emotional. I still enjoy our time together and our laughs, and I'm really happy we've committed to doing some more of this going forward, mate. Yeah,
me too. I've really, really enjoyed it. I mean, it's a strain sometimes to find the time to prep, and we're both really busy, but it's been a real highlight of my weeks when we've done it. I've really enjoyed it, and listening back to them recently again for the second or third time, I think they're really good. I think they're good, and I've actually not minded listening to myself that much, apart from the fact that it's not that interesting. Apart from the interesting thing has really started to grate on me, so that's got to go. I mean, just in recap for me, I would say great. It's a great podcast, I think, and we've had some really great guests. We've had some really good interaction, and we've really enjoyed that. Yes, we need to promote it better. Yes, we need to improve in terms of our facilitation, some of our annoying catchphrases, and the way that we share the learning. But ultimately, I think there's a really good value in it. And if we use it properly to share some of the things that we're learning for the good of other places, or just for people to reflect on and think about, and for us to continue to take that time for personal reflection on learning and things, that's going to improve the way that we work in our places and within our teams and our organisations as well. So lots of good has come out of it, and I'm excited for season 2. Are we going to have a uniform for season 2? Some kind of matching outfit regime going on?
Well, we're both going hoodies, so maybe just pop your hood up. Maybe it's this.
Which looks so good.
Yeah, we don't carry it off, do we?
No.
All right, brilliant. Thank you so much, Ken. Right, okay, thank you, as always, to everybody who's listened. Genuinely, if you do have any feedback, the good and the bad, please do share it directly with me and Ken, or even put it on Twitter. We don't mind people kind of knowing the reality of what we've been doing. But for now, thank you so much for listening to the podcasts, and really looking forward to season 2. Hope you stick with us, and you'll be hearing from us very soon.